And this is covering the team tools. I think if you haven't done these before, you'll find that these are some of the most useful tools, not only in Six Sigma projects, but in lots of other things as well. Some more useful than others. And I like to think of diverging tools and converging tools because that's kind of what we want to do. So we want to create, in a Six Sigma project, we want to create, kind of think of it like I don't know if I can draw this very well. Looks like a wine glass, but it's supposed to be the thing that you put in your oil to fill up your oil, or a kitchen to get it into a small hole, right? It's a funnel. So in the beginning, we want lots of ideas for what we can do. So here we'll talk about things like brainstorming. All right, brainstorming is the key tool that we're going to use to generate all the different types of ideas that we can. But then we need to converge all of these things. And this is a constant struggle. Do we have enough ideas? Oh, God, we've got too many ideas. Let's see if we can look for some commonality and put them back together and get a different picture. And for this converging piece right there, we're going to look at two tools. They're grouping tools. One is called Affinity, which is my favorite, and one is called Fishbone, which is widely used and also good. And then we want to decide for our priorities what to go deep on. And so we use a prioritization tool called multi-voting. We'll cover that in this lecture, but there are some other things that we can use as well. We'll find out later we can use something called Decision Guru, which is a, trademark name, sorry, which is a tool I think you can use to more rationally prioritize. But multi-voting, great team tool. I think you'll enjoy it. And then we'll have some things that help us go really deep. So those are the statistical tools that we'll look into. But also in the team tool section, we'll be talking about an interrelationship diagraph, okay, and we'll be talking about 5 whys or YY analysis. A lot of people call 5 whys. I'll tip my hat to fashion at the moment and call it 5 whys. So that's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover brainstorming, Affinity, Fishbone, ID, and 5 whys in this section. I think we can do it fairly quickly. Now there's a certain sequence that I really like that I call a BAM session. And what this means is I start out by brainstorming. It's exactly what it looks like. This is brainstorming. I don't need to write it out. You guys can see it. This is brainstorming. A stands for affinity, and M stands for multi-vote. And sometimes you can have a meeting. If you plan it right, you can do it in an hour or less, even teaching people what the things are, and really come out with some really key ideas and a cool team picture of what are the ideas that we can look at, as well as which ones we think are the high priority ideas that we ought to look at. You can use it for defects. You can use it for categorizing and understanding defects. You can use it for customers, understanding customers more deeply, or customer concerns. And so we use it a lot. Okay, so that's called a BAM session. At least that's what I call it. All right. All right, so let us, as the rabbit said, get back to where we were. So I want to talk a little bit about you know what, I'll go back to my blackboard here. Now let's talk about brainstorming for just a minute here. So let's talk about brainstorming. I'm sure most of you have done brainstorming before. Okay, and this discussion is found on slides 75 to 77. But I'd like you to think a little bit. Let's take 15 seconds and let's just write down. You can brainstorm, brainstorm the things that you think are kind of important ideas or thoughts about brainstorming. If you've held a brainstorming session before, what are just some different observations or rules that you've thought of? Okay, like for example, in brainstorming, sometimes people say a rule is no idea is a bad idea. Okay, there's no criticism. All right, so that might be an example. All right, so I'd like you to take 15 seconds and think about that, and then we will whiteboard or blackboard our ideas, capture some of these. Okay, what else should I write down here? What are some things, Jim? What's an idea that you had in terms of what's a good idea to have in a brainstorm?
Well, most of the brainstorming sessions that I've been in, they really don't set any rules, and I think it's really important at the beginning is to set rules on how the brainstorming session is to be conducted.
Okay, so set some. So what I would say is, would you say is state rules? State rules
Right.
in front? Got it. Great. I love that. Okay, great. Let's see. Let me put Tracy on the spot. So Tracy, what's an observation that you've had about brainstorming session?
I think it's important to know your audience. And whether or not they're going to be comfortable brainstorming and in terms of which brainstorming tool you're going to use.
Ah, okay. Good. So could you give us maybe a concrete example of that?
Sure. If you have a bunch of staff level people that you're brainstorming with and you're brainstorming, what's going to make the boss more effective, you might want to let them write their ideas down and share the brainstorm that way and get all the ideas up there so that people don't know who said what first. However, if it's a comfortable group of people and there's trust in the room, they can just, and you've got a lot of pushy people like me, then they will just throw out their ideas.
Uh-huh, got it. Got it.
It's not an emotional or sensitive topic you're brainstorming.
Got it. I like that. So sometimes having something that's silent or anonymous so that people don't know.
At least to start it, yeah.
Right. Or sometimes when you have somebody who dominates, maybe you might have to have like a round-robin participation or something like that to make sure everybody gets a voice. Otherwise, like you said, people like me and you will be the people who talk all the time. Okay, great. That's excellent. All right, Shani and Sue?
Similar to what Tracy was saying, that ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to share an idea, and that putting forth the ground rule that it's a no judgment zone, like you had indicated, no bad idea, but kind of stating that we're going to throw the ideas down, but we're not going to judge them right now. We're just going to get as many ideas down as we can. Yeah,
excellent. So I like that. I like that. So the idea is it's quantity. Let's put it this way, quantity, not quality, right? We want a high quantity of ideas. We'll take quality ideas, but that's not the focus. That's not the focus. Okay, excellent, excellent. And John?
Yeah, I think that setting the parameters and boundaries of where you're looking for creative ideas on is important. I just came from a meeting about emergency medicine, emergency department redesign, and the discussions, the brainstorming wandered in flow throughout the entire hospital, and I actually had to accommodate that response, but I also had to say I need the brainstorming to be within this scope of work, not other areas that are outside the scope.
Yeah, so I'm going to paraphrase that as maybe set some constraints.
Yes, absolutely.
Know the constraints.
Yeah, yeah. The other input I have into brainstorming is separating the goals of listing brainstorming ideas from defending and justifying why my idea is better than your idea.
Yes, right. So, yeah. So this is
I forget there's a word. There's a Japanese phrase for doing that actually talks about the process of brainstorming. It actually separates the elements from idea collection to qualifying and quantifying and prioritizing the idea.
Yes, right. So I got it. So I think I've got it. So the way that I see that sort of thing coming up is, yeah, it's not about defending your idea. It's not about explaining what the idea is either. It's just about putting it out there and not going to the depths of it. One of the things that I like to do is I like to set time limits. Some other observations I've known is set time limits. That I find that to be helpful. I also find setting. You might want to give the team a challenge. Set a goal. Now, you know my opinion about stretch goals and all this, but sometimes if you say, hey, I think we can generate, I bet we can generate 50 ideas within 10 minutes. Sometimes it seems people don't believe it, and then you can, but they can readjust where they want to be. You have to be careful with that a little bit.
Mark, Brad here.
Yeah, hi, Brad.
Hey, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not on my computer, but
oh, okay.
One of the rules I like to implement is, hand out stickies, and it's a 3 sticky rule. You have to write down at least 3 ideas on a sticky.
Love it, love it. Okay, so hand out stickies, right? So I like doing stickies too, and that's part of the whole BAM session, as you'll see, or hopefully you'll see. You won't be able to. You actually won't be able to contribute on this one if you're not on the computer session, but that's okay. Yeah, so there's lots of different ideas. There's lots of different variants. I like the stickies because then you're not the bottleneck. Unfortunately, I'm going to be the facilitator this time. But sometimes, if we're having like a flip chart, we're writing down ideas, which is what we're doing right now. Then the facilitator becomes the bottleneck for the flow of ideas, and it slows things down. So if you can do it face to face with sticky notes, I much prefer that because it encourages the whole participation through anonymity. When you do round robins, people have at least 3 or something like that. You can do that. One other thing, there's so many different variants of brainstorming. I don't want to get into them too much, but one of the ones that I've actually found helpful is when I have a team and they're just so focused on we can't do any better and why are you here trying to make us improve. I sometimes say, okay, you know what? You guys do such a great job. What would be the things that we could do to make it worse? And we start out with doing 5 minutes of what are all the things that we could do to make it worse. Now, you don't want to use those ideas, but sometimes you can look at them and say, and it loosens people up, and sometimes you can actually turn them around. So it's just an idea that I've found occasionally helpful. Use it sparingly. I want to make one more comment on something that I believe Jim and certainly John talked about, and that is setting some constraints. A lot of people feel that creativity has to have no bounds. Studies have shown, many studies have shown that that's actually not true. That in most creative situations, there are some constraints. And so setting reasonable constraints is often a great way to do it. Setting time limit constraints is a nice thing that you can do. Setting some upfront constraints about what can be done as well is helpful. So let's in order to illustrate this, and I'm just going to do this pretty quickly. Let me just do a if all of you are still on the or for those of you who are on the computer, I'm going to clean up my desktop. Now, this is not 5S. This is just shoving everything under the rug. Okay, I'll skip that one. All right. Oh, and I want to leave my Excel stats out because we'll be using it. Okay, so I'm just going to clean my desktop just a little bit. You can see I have a bunch of temporary files. That's actually for you guys. I unpack those every week. Okay, and so now we've got a nice clean slate, and what I want us to brainstorm is why do people now? Hopefully this is a good illustration because it works for a lot of people. Why do people come late to meetings? If you're like most companies, many meetings, there's lots of people who come late, and it's a real problem because people wait, they repeat things. So there's a lot of reasons why people might come late to meetings. It could be a real problem. Let's see if we can brainstorm some of those, and just as an illustration. And so what I'd like you to do is I'm going to open up a clock here. All right, that's my countdown clock. All right. And I'm going to put 5 minutes on the time, but what I'd like us to do is, if you have a piece of paper, let's write down, try and write down, Brad said 3. That sounds good. Let's take 1 minute to write down a few reasons why you think people come late to meetings, okay? So I'll put 1 minute on the clock, and then I'll ask you to stop. So if everybody's all set, and there's no bad ideas here, right? So if we were talking about the ways that we could use a rake, you know, an answer of, hey, I could use it to rake leaves, or I could use it to unstick a basketball that's on the roof, are both acceptable answers, okay? So remember, we're talking about why do people come late to meetings. Okay, is everybody all set? Let's go, 1 minute. Okay, I'd like to stop this now, and let's see. Okay, so let's take some of your ideas, and again, normally if you're doing this face-to-face, this can be fairly easy to do, and people have already written them on sticky notes or whatever. But I see we lost Tracy, unfortunately, on the internet. So let's just start with let's just kind of walk around the room. So let's start with Jim, and maybe you could tell. Well, you know what? I'll tell mine first. I'll share one of mine, and then we'll just kind of walk around round robin, and we'll share what the ideas are that we had. Okay. So. I'll share mine first, and that is that. Now, just keep in mind, if I were going to be doing this in a real situation, I would have taken time to give ground rules, analogies, and examples. You saw me attempt to give one, and I would also put a time limit on our session that we're doing now, because in reality, I don't just want 3 answers from everybody. I'd love to get 10. So the idea is that those 3 answers kind of spur some other ideas from other people. So I'll start out with one of mine, and then we'll go to Jim, and then John, and then Shani, and Sue. And anybody else who's on the line, you can tell me. So one of the things is to go to, because I have other meetings. Okay. Jim, would you like to share one?
Well, I know that this was meant for me, Mark, but then I rethought it, and mine would be, why do I not show up at all? But
Why?
So,
no, it's not meant for you. It's meant for everybody.
It was a joke, Mark.
Yeah, I got it.
Inability to say no.
Okay. John? Oops, did we lose John? Looks like we lost John. Don't think I have him muted. Okay, let's go on to Shani and Sue.
People have back-to-back meetings.
Now, one of the things you should be noticing is I'm not writing a heck of a lot. All right, that was, I think that was Sue. Shani, did you have one?
Just that people are busy.
Okay. Brad, are you on the line? Okay. Let's go back to mine now. Had to go to the bathroom. Not me now, but had to go to the bathroom before the meeting. Okay, Jim?
Poor scheduling.
Okay, Shani?
Acceptable in the culture.
Okay. Sue?
I have the last meeting ran overtime and late.
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Okay, John, do I have you back on the line? Tracy? Okay, I'll list Brad. Okay, I'll list mine. Meeting not high value. Okay. All right, Jim.
Yeah, I had priorities down. I guess that's covered by not how, there's only so much time in the day, and I think you have to prioritize your meetings.
Okay, got it. I'll put not high priorities. High priority. Not quite the same thing, so we'll put it that way. It's good to even list things that you think are not quite dupes. I mean, there's plenty of other time to do that outside the brainstorming session. Okay, let's just get a couple more. So, Shani?
Actually, all of mine have already been said.
Okay, do you have any other ideas?
Off the top of my head?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't.
Sue? Sue?
All my ideas have been said, but maybe some people are just always late for everything.
Maybe, yeah, okay, some people...
Some people are always early, some people are always on time, some people are always late. I'm always late.
Okay. All right, great. I want to add one. It's a, you put it's acceptable in the culture. Not interested in beginning topics. So I show up late. Okay. Anybody else have any to add? Okay. Now, for those of you who are still on the line, I know there's a few people who are. What I've done is I've given everybody the. Oh, good. And I see Tracy has come back because I wanted Tracy to see this as well. So this is kind of what we have, and yet notice that I haven't given any order, and that's the problem with brainstorming, or the good and the bad with brainstorming is that it's just out there, right? So if we wanted to add various things, like in this case, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different items. Probably, if we really thought about it, we could get all sorts of other things, like no watch, cell phone went dead, so forth, right? All sorts of things like that. There's plenty of reasons why they can come up. Okay, so what I've done is, so where do you go from here? So now I've got a mess of ideas. how do I make sense of it? What I've done is I've given all of us the controls, and in just a minute I'll like us to do something called an affinity. So we've done brainstorming, and now what I'd like us to do is to do an affinity diagram, and you'll see how it works. For those of you who have done it already, you know that it can work some real magic. Now I'm going to be a bit space constrained on this, but so I'm going to close down my Excel clock. But just to give you an idea of what a finished affinity diagram will be, is it'll show some order to all of these things, and it'll also give us some idea of what we will call all these different types of reasons why people came late to meetings. So so what I'd like us to do is I'm going to spread these out a little bit so we can read them. And hopefully you can still see my screen. Again, normally you'd have more of these, so it'd be even harder to do. So this is a good number for this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to silently, and this is the key thing. If you're doing this in a room, you want to run an affinity session with plenty of room for people to move in and out, to actually pick up the sticky notes and move them around. You would also like to have basically a big area of a wall, if you could, to handle all these things, so you give people some room to move them around. We don't have quite that, but the good thing is, we're not going to write on the walls. So so basically what happens now is you give people a time, and this usually takes, with a real problem, maybe 10 to 15 minutes max, and you give them some time to move things around, and here's what they're going to do. It's called affinity because affinity means closeness, and what we're going to do is we're going to put closeness ideas in connection with closeness of the sticky notes, okay, with physical closeness. So, for example, if I think that no watch and cell phone went dead are basically very, very similar, I would pick one up and move it there. Okay? That makes sense to everybody? And now maybe somebody else would have a different idea, and they can move that, make these a little bit smaller if I can, just to get a little more room. They can move things around and put it to their liking. But usually it doesn't, there isn't too much movement that has to happen before patterns emerge and the group comes up with a grouping that makes sense to them. And then, by the way, the magic of this is, guess what? The team owns that then, because they created that, and it's something that you can actually communicate well with. All right? So let's go ahead and do that. And normally you'd have everybody do it at once, but I'm going to ask people to kind of do it in order. You should be able to move your mouse, and we'll move my mouse on my screen. So let's start out with Sue and Shani. So I'll ask you guys to take a moment. I know you're both working on the same computer. So we'll ask Sue and Shani to go first. Go ahead and move one or more of the sticky notes if you need to, or if you want to. You got it. And just let us know when you're more or less done.
Up here? Yep. Okay. Yeah. That's that, and now. And lastly. Okay. Yep. I think we're done.
Okay. Great. Now I'm going to ask Tracy. First of all, can you go ahead and can you move the stuff on my screen? Excellent. Looks like you can. All right. So feel free to move any of the sticky notes, including the ones that are already grouped. You can move them out of the groups if you like to. That's fine. No, again, normally you'd have people kind of doing this all at once, and it doesn't usually lead to a fist fight or anything like that. Here we're safe from that, I think, all being virtual and all being professional. But go ahead and move any ones that are close, that you feel are close in ideas to each other. And if you're all done, then you can say, I don't need to move any, or whatever. Yeah, I think if you click on the center between the plus and the X, you'll be able to do it. There you go. Excellent.
I'll leave it there.
Okay. All right, and we'll do one more. Jim?
That looks good to me.
Okay. Excellent. I just want to show you one other thing that can sometimes happen. It looks, this, by the way, this is great, and it's a nice place to start. I just want to show you one thing that can sometimes happen. So I can tell you at least what my thinking was on some of this. I might have moved this over to here. Now, if that happens, if you're just getting this going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, or maybe this is over here, back and forth, all you need to do is create another one and put it down, and we can end the argument that way. So if we think back and forth meetings is both of these places, that's fine. That's fine. Or if we think poor scheduling belongs in both of those places, that's fine. Okay? All right. So, all right. So one of the next things that we can do is, if we've got it, we should separate these. And then there's a lot of talk. At this point, there's a lot of talking between the groups. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to, when you've got them all separated, I'm trying to separate them by leaving a little bit of room underneath. There we go. Oh, this is actually pretty good. There we go. Okay, and we can then, we'll want to then spend some time putting labels on each of these. Put this underneath. So we'll give them all names. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an additional sticky note, and I'm going to color it differently. I think I can, I thought I could color it. No, looks like I can't. Oh, there it is right there. Okay, so we'll use the blue sticky note. And let's find a name for, like, for example, what might be a name for this one, for this group right here? What might be a name for this group right here? Anybody? Let's try this one. What might be a name for this group? Always late from everything, and it's acceptable in the culture.
Culture.
Might be culture.
Company culture.
That's fine. It might be culture. Keep in mind, we've just worked this very quickly. Or like this one might be technical competence. Right? If I don't know how to work my watch, and that happens constantly, or I don't know how to use my Outlook appropriately, and I constantly have poor scheduling, yeah, maybe I'm just not competent to make it to meetings on time. Right? Okay. And you can argue with each of these different things, but that's the idea. Is at the end of this, you can come up with essentially groupings for, in this case, why people come, late to meetings? Well, you know, there's the technical side of things. There's the culture. You know, we have a culture of, say, back-to-back meetings anyway, and you know, then there's all this we have too many meetings. So we have a culture of too many meetings. You know, I'm just naming that right now. Normally, you'd want to do it with the team, and so forth. It lets you kind of communicate that, and very often let you take like 50 ideas and congeal that into like 5 or 6. Very, very helpful tool. That's how that works. Okay? So far, so good? Make sense? Aha, Brad is here, and you have the power too. Okay. All right, so that's how that works. Now, I do want to show you on page 81 in our text. There's an alternative to using affinity, and that's a fishbone diagram. Fishbone diagrams are great very often for defects. If you're trying to understand why defects are occurring in different areas, fishbone diagrams are fantastic. But they work essentially like affinity. The difference is, in Fishbone, you decide on the categories first, and then brainstorm ideas before putting them up. In Affinity, it's created the other way around. So, you know, Affinity is sometimes helpful if you find that the typical ways of categorizing things are not real conducive to solving the problem. So sometimes, for example, it may be more useful to think of a zebra as something that is colored black and white rather than as a herbivore. Okay, if that makes any sense to you. That one thing is potentially more valuable to another given the problem setting. All right, so affinity tends to work a little bit better in those. But Fishbone, again, is a wonderful tool, and it works pretty well. I just wanted to point that out. That's certainly in the team tools, so you can certainly pull out a Fishbone anytime and use that. And these are just the standard categories in Fishbone, but you can use. And by the way, some people use 6, some people use 5. I learned them as the 5 Ps. Some people learned them as the 5 Ms. Doesn't matter. Obviously, they put different. If you did the 5 Ms, you learned environment was called Mother Nature. I guess that's maybe a little sexist, but anyway. And procedures were methods. So anyway, you can brainstorm your own prior to doing the session too. So that's another idea. All right, I want to finish up with doing something called multi-voting. Now, one of the things, if we go back to our desktop here, one of the things we haven't done yet, we might have a good idea of where we want to of the picture now, but we don't have a good priority in terms of looking into these ideas. I mean, if we really think that we want to fix this meeting problem, where should we drill down? Should we drill down into the multiple schedule? I guess I better put a name on all these. Or should we drill down in other places, like, hey, we have back-to-back meetings and so forth? All right. So, so one of the tools that you can use to do that is a tool that is on 84, and it starts on 83. There's an explanation for it. But the picture, I think, tells 1,000 words in this case. It's called multi-voting. And if you can imagine, suppose I gave you all 3 votes, and you could cast your votes on any of the sticky notes, and you could cast all of the 3 on one of them if you wanted to, or you could cast, or you could spread them out. Okay? So you could use colored markers to do this, or you could have a silent vote. Either way. But just imagine that that's what you were doing. So in our picture on the desktop, it would be something like this. You know, if I gave people different colors and you got 3 votes, I might vote on well, this is what I think is my important, and I'm going to cast all 3 votes there. Sue, where would you cast your votes, Sue? Where might you cast your votes? You can just use an example.
Where might I cast my vote? I would actually agree with you with back-to-back meetings.
Okay, and you'd put all 3 there?
I would put, actually I put 1 there, too many meetings, and then,
okay, so just 1 over on this guy.
and then the culture.
And then culture. It's acceptable. Yeah. Okay, got it. So now notice there's a couple of things here. One is you can go directly for the area, or you can go for a sticky note within the area. In the end, you just kind of want to step back and you want to see where all the dots are. And so, not to make up answers for everybody, but that's what I'm going to do now. So, maybe for Jim, maybe it's his cell phone went dead. Maybe that's a big one for him. But maybe it's it's acceptable in the culture that we're living at, and an inability to say no. We have an inability to say no. Somebody else might say there's high priority, whatever. In the end, we ought to get a smattering of these things, and we can see what are the areas that we want to drill down on. So if we ended up with a picture that was like this, this would give us an idea that, hey, let's look into why we have all these scheduled back-to-back meetings. That's a huge problem for us. Okay? So that's how this works. That's how multi-voting works. It just is a quick and dirty prioritization mechanism. That's helpful when you have these sticky notes. Okay, and that's a BAM session. That when you put it all together, that's your BAM session. That's your BAM session. Brainstorm, affinity, multi-vote, and you can move very quickly. Usually in say an hour, you can get a clear picture on how to move on how to fix defects, or what customers or ideas ought to have priority, what CTQ, what voice of the customer elements are most important. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool or set of tools. Okay, so I'm going to move on. What questions do you have on what we've covered so far, which is brainstorming, affinity, and multi-voting? Okay. I would also like it. I'm going to check my mute button to make sure people aren't muted. Looks like everybody's unmuted. If you've used this before, if anybody has any experiences of sharing these tools in conjunction or alone, I'd be happy to hear them. I think it'd be valuable for the group.
Mark, we've used that a number of times, and what I find that I like about it is that it helps people to prioritize, and if you do it where it's silently, people aren't being influenced necessarily by management or by someone else, and so you get to really see where people feel the real issues are or where they feel the real solutions are.
Excellent. Yeah, we used it in the front-end quoting, if you recall.
We did.
Where
we used it multiple times in our pharmacy authorization one. We find that on this particular project, silence, they are very quiet. They are driving us crazy, but so this worked particularly well with them.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. Any other experiences? Okay.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
Is this John?
It's
No, this is Brad. I'm trying out my...
I can hear you. Yes, you sound very close. Are you in my backyard? That's your VoIP, I take it. Well, maybe we lost you. Okay. Well, if you do come back, be more than willing to listen to it. I'm gonna move on at this point, but there's two other tools that are in the section. I just want to show you what they are. And we'll have a very short lecture on those. But if you haven't seen them before, I just want to mention it. The first one is why analysis, which is one of those tools to go very, very deep. So the idea is you take whatever the effect is. Like suppose we said, okay, yeah, why are people late to meetings? Because there's multiple reasons, right? But we want to choose the ones that we want to drill down in deeply. One of those was back-to-back meetings. We asked the next question, well, why do people have back-to-back meetings? There can be multiple reasons for that, and so forth. The idea is to use typically about 5, although sometimes you can get to the bottom of a problem with like 3 or 4. Typically about 5 whys will get you to things that are real endpoints. And you'll get to the point where you say, well, why is that true? Well, it's because Mother Nature is that way, or because if you're religious, it's because God made it that way, or if you're a naturalist or whatever, you'll say because Mother Nature was made that way. Anyway, so an example, and the one that everybody usually uses, no doubt apocryphal, is the one about the Lincoln Memorial and the steps on there that we're wearing. And the linear fashion is, why were the Lincoln Memorial steps wearing out so fast? Because they were being cleaned a lot. Why were they being cleaned a lot? Because there was pigeon poop all over them. Why was there pigeon poop? Because the pigeons came to eat the spiders that were living there. Why were the spiders living there? Because there were midges that were coming from the reflecting pool. Why were the midges coming from the reflecting pool? Because they were attracted to the lights on at dusk. Why were the lights on at dusk? Because we did it. Because we turned them on at dusk. Why do we turn them on at dusk? Because we do. Why do we do it? Because that's the rule. Why is that the rule? Because we said it. So you see, at some point it becomes ridiculous. And you can start going back to say, well, maybe we ought to stop at because that's the rule, and maybe we can do something actionable. The key is to say at each place, can we do something actionable about this, and can we ask one more why? It's important to do both of those because let's take the example when you say, well, why is there so much pigeon poop on the steps? It's because pigeons come there to eat the spiders. You might say, well, okay, I have a solution. Let's just get out guns and shoot the pigeons. That might be a major problem on the Washington Mall. You know, that's and it's a much more costly solution than maybe altering by 10 minutes when you turn on the lights. So anyway, so it's worth it to ask. The danger with this and with a lot of these tools is the multiple whys. So there's lots of different answers that could have been given to any of those, and so make sure you do your best to kind of drill the ones that are important and not drill the ones that aren't that important. Okay? Here's an example of, you'll notice in the book we talked through an example of kids on vacation. I'll tell you, that was in my brain as I was doing this. Why do we have a poor vacation? It was because the kids were unhappy. There's lots of other reasons, but that's the primary one I want to drill into. Why? Because they were tired, frustrated, and bored. Why were they frustrated? Why were they bored? Well, we took them to the Museum of Medieval Farming. Okay, that seems like, why did we do that? You know, why was that boring? Well, because it is, and so forth. And you can come down to all this, and you know, basically, the solution here is that dad is inherently uncool and boring, and maybe mom ought to make the decisions for what the kids are supposed to be doing. At least that's how it was in our group. Finally, I want to talk about something called an ID graph or a spider diagram. And this is another way, if you're having trouble understanding sort of, if you have multiple potential causes or problems, it's sometimes helpful for understanding what's causing what. Let me show you what it is. If say we have five different potential problems or things, like the kids are unhappy, we have to spend a lot, there's a high cost, and things like that. We draw a picture, and we start with each box, and we draw arrows, each for whether it's driving whether that particular problem is driving the other particular problem. So, for example, if kids were driving cost, then kids would be a driver of that. But not the other way around, right? So you try with each of these. At the end, you'll count the hours, the arrows coming in, the arrows coming out, and it lets you know sort of what's driving what. An example, I think, will clear up a lot of this stuff. So here might be all the different issues that we had: transportation, kids' activities, interest, and friends, and cost. And we would start with, say, let's start with, well, let's do kids' activities, right? So you might say, are the kids' activities driving the issues with transportation? Yes? Okay, so it gets an arrow going out. Are kids' activities driving cost? Yes? Okay, so it gets an arrow going out. Are kids' activities driving friends? Yes, because we wouldn't go to these particular friends if we didn't have kids, because they have kids. Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's driving that. And yes, it's driving interest too. So we want to go to some places, but kids won't be interested, so we'll go to some other place. And if you do that with all the boxes, you can count the ins and count the outs, and it'll allow you to see which are drivers and which are sort of more results. So in this case, for example, cost is not driving too many things, but it's got some boxes coming in, so it's a result of, for example, kids' activities are driving cost as well as transportation driving cost. But kids' activities is a real driver here. So it allows you to, it's another prioritization tool, if you will. So sometimes it's helpful to know of all the different problems, how they're interrelated. Interrelationship diagraph can help you understand that. Or spider diagram, sometimes people call it. Okay? So basically, we've covered all the tools in there. I won't claim that we've covered them to their depths. I want you to really take away this idea of the BAM session, and also, of taking away the idea of a BAM session, brainstorm, affinity, multi-voting, awesome tool, or awesome set of tools. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and move on from this, but before I do, I want to make sure that we have questions, or that all the questions are answered. So let me kind of go back to my Blackboard and go back to here. And remember, we covered the team tools, which we had some diverging tools. The main one we talked about was brainstorming, get lots of ideas, quantity, not quality. Affinity, which helps us group those ideas. Fishbone does the same thing, so it's alternative. And then we use multi-voting to help prioritize. And then there were a couple of different tools that really helped us go deep. Diagraph and the 5 whys. Okay? So what questions do you have before we move into a different topic?
Hey, Mark, it's Jim.
Hey, Jim.
What are some of the little tricks that you've learned to avoid putting some of your team members and your subject matter experts on the defensive? You know, for example, you might have somebody who has multiple years of experience with a particular process, and he just feels real defensive about the reasons why he continues to do what he does.
Yeah. Well, there's a few different things. There's a few different things that you can try. One is to do, one is to have anonymity if there are problems that are a little bit different than what you talked about. I'm not getting participation because my boss is in the room, or because I'm just shy by nature. And round robins and prompting people for participation is helpful too. You'll notice I was doing that as we were doing the round robins. I eventually stopped because I noticed that people weren't on, or some people weren't on during that time. But that can be helpful too. You don't want to push it too much, but like you'll notice that I did that with Shani just a little bit. Shani can take it. I know that. She's no shrinking violet. But when she said I don't have any more ideas, or the ideas that I had, I said, oh, do you have any other ones that you'd like to share? So some of those things can be helpful. Working really hard to keep it light is very important. So if you can come up with a crazy analogy to start out and maybe encourage other people to come up with crazy analogies, sometimes that's helpful, because it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys are fans of The Twilight Zone. I happen to be a fan of Rod Serling and The Twilight Zone, but he wrote something before that called Playhouse 90. He wrote a lot of those things, which was very high-quality television that was done. The problem was it was very expensive. But he was very into talking about the political and the social issues of the day. The problem was he was getting censored. So he found a way around the censors by saying, oh, well, what if aliens, what if we put people and aliens doing these things so that it was unreal? Then we could make statements about what it would be like to live in a totalitarian society, or we could explore lots of things. The Planet of the Apes is a great example of that, or certainly I think it's called Eye of the Beholder, when this lady is given plastic surgery and she comes back and she looks beautiful to us, but then it fades back and everybody has these pig-like faces. He could do that because he's talking about aliens. So not that you have to talk about aliens all the time, but having some crazy things that are unrelated to work sometimes helps.
That's excellent. I really like that.
Okay, yeah, good. And in fact, sometimes the other way doesn't work either. I remember once doing a simulation at a healthcare, a small dental healthcare facility, and we did a processing simulation of demonstrating lean that actually was their own process. They got so into it that there were two people actually got into a screaming match. I wasn't watching closely enough, and they were upset at each other. So it got more real than it. I had to talk to them and say, "Look, guys, this is a simulation. It doesn't really matter. Okay, let's pretend this is widgets." Okay, great question. Great question. Okay, what other questions do you have? Okay,